May 8th, 1965, Carl Robert Disch, a 25-year-old ionospheric physicist, vanished without a trace in the mysterious and inhospitable land of Antarctica. There has been much intrigue and mystery surrounding this case, as it was widely publicized in newspapers at the time. Theories have arisen in the absence of any real answers. If you dig into this yourself, you'll find that, of what information is available, much of it is contradictory and murky. I've included my sources in a pinned comment below if you want to research further on your own. Carl Robert Disch was born in 1940 to Leonard Disch Sr. and Martha Schneider Disch. He was the youngest of three brothers, Walter Disch and Harold George Disch. He grew up in Monroe, Wisconsin. His brother, Harold, joined the U.S. Army just after the Korean War and served from 1954 to 1956. Carl himself was known for his intelligence. It's said that he was considered among the most brilliant of his colleagues. The Antarctic continent is primarily populated by researchers and support staff working on scientific expeditions. Given that the land itself is so dangerous, safety measures are in place to mitigate risks. Like his colleagues, Disch would stay in Antarctica for long periods at a time. This wasn't even Disch's first time in Antarctica. He returned home from a previous stay in Antarctica fairly recently before going back. Disch worked for the National Bureau of Standards, which is now the National Institute of Science and Technology, under the U.S. Antarctic Program, which oversees all U.S. presence in Antarctica. The National Bureau of Standards was founded in 1901, tasked with establishing standards of weights and measures for the United States. They were also the first national physical laboratory. The NBS began experimenting with radio almost since the creation of radio technology itself. The first documented radio research at NBS occurred in 1905. Investigations into very low frequency waves began. Disch worked at a VLF substation of the main Byrd station, studying radio static. The Antarctic conditions made it an ideal environment for studying radio waves and static, unimpeded by the usual radio noise cluttering the airwaves. It was a normal Antarctic evening. That winter, there were 29 people, 19 military, and 8 scientists. At twilight, Disch and 3 other men visited the conjugate station of the Environmental Science Services Administration. The 4 men played cards and listened to a tape recorder. Eventually, Disch told the other 3 that he had to get back to town early tomorrow and began donning his polar weather gear. He then picked up the mic and contacted the main Byrd station and let them know that he was on his way to what they called the Big Hole, the main entrance to the Byrd station. The scientists regularly made the trek between the conjugate station and the main station. It was a distance of roughly half a mile. This was a normal part of their routine. It became abnormal when 45 minutes passed without Disch reaching his destination. Almost immediately, a missing person alarm was flashed, and they began searching for Disch. They began searching for Disch during a snowstorm, with temperatures reaching negative 45 degrees, with 35-mile-per-hour winds. Powerful searchlights were used, hoping that Disch would see them and return. One group of men searched the handline for any sign of the missing scientist. The handline itself was found to be completely intact and unbroken. Over an hour later, vehicles were brought out to aid in the search, and a set of footprints were found, leading southwest toward the end of a runway. At this point, the search party began using huskies to aid in the search. Officials would later specify that huskies have much better visibility in the blowing snow. According to the Antarctic Report of May 1965, Disch apparently failed to make contact with the handline between the radio noise installation and Byrd station. The team followed the footprints for 9 miles before the footprints ended with no trace of Carl. The official reports noted that there was no noticeable shortening of stride in his tracks. Jim Bartley, a former winter-over resident of Byrd Station who aided in the search, stated, "We tried in vain to find Carl. but at the time the wind was raging with minus 45-degree temperature. All we could do was tie ropes around our waists, spread out on both sides of the D8 cat, and walk along hoping to stumble over him. It was like finding a needle in a haystack blindfolded. After the tracks were followed to a dead end, the team went back to refuel, and when they returned, they couldn't find any more tracks. The search was temporarily called off due to weather conditions. According to the Antarctic report, quote, "It was not until the morning of May 9th that a party could continue tracking. In the meantime, the immediate station area, the supply line, and dump were investigated. When the tracks were lost a second time, a major search effort, including vehicles, a sled-mounted hut, and a supply of food and fuel, proceeded to the point where the tracks were last seen, and continued southward for 13 miles from the station on the 10th and the 11th, making perpendicular sweeps to the east and west, with no success. In the station area, the search continued, and a party visited the old bird station 6 miles away. Repeated attempts were made to reach the Long Wire site 11 miles to the northwest, although this direction was contrary to the direction of the footprints and almost into the wind, making it a highly unlikely one for Disch to have taken. Throughout this period, there were intermittent storms, with winds up to 45 knots and visibility reduced to zero by heavy blowing snow, seasonal darkness, and overcast. At one point, the temperature dropped to negative 79 degrees Fahrenheit, seriously interfering with the movement of the men and the vehicles. The station complement utilized the brief twilight at midday and the light of the full moon whenever possible to advance the search efforts. The National Science Foundation stated and emphasized that Carl was dressed very warmly. Washington authorities reportedly told Disch's family that they believed Carl could have survived 2 days, given his polar weather gear and other circumstances. In various newspapers, it was claimed that during the search efforts, there were reports of strange flashing lights which they could not identify. After 3 days, the search for Carl Disch was called off, as he was presumed to be deceased. Memorial services were held in Antarctica and in his hometown of Monroe, Wisconsin. Further searches were planned for the spring when conditions improved, but nothing ever came of them. As this case was widely covered in newspapers at the time, a lot of rumors and speculation was thrown around. Ron Sefton of Stanford University, scientific leader of Bird Station, and Antarctic explorer, investigated the case for the U.S. Antarctic Research Program and gave newspaper interviews hoping to dispel some of the rumors surrounding the case. Quote, "It's a good Antarctic story. I've heard a number of versions of it myself, embellished with weird stories about the possibilities of the scientist and the dog being snatched up by UFOs, or the possibility of their heading for a hidden lush valley, where folklore says the skuas go during the long Antarctic winter." Among the rumors, it was said that the day after Disch's disappearance, one of the huskies involved in the search, Gus, vanished after running towards the same direction that Carl went. Sefton admits that although Gus's disappearance was just as strange as Carl's, Gus didn't disappear until 4 months after Carl, contrary to popular rumors claiming the husky disappeared the day following Carl's disappearance. Sefton offered no further explanation as to what befell Gus. Sefton also does not deny that strange flashing lights and sounds were reported by the search team, but he dismisses these reports, claiming that the source of the lights and sounds were merely vehicles which were also searching for Disch, unbeknownst to the rest of the team. I would be remiss if I didn't discuss Carl's supposed last transmissions. On the internet, unsubstantiated rumors surface from time to time, alleging that in 1971 and in subsequent years, McMurdo Station received transmissions from Carl Disch. The following is supposedly the first transmission. "I am Carl Disch. To the world I am dead. They believe that my body is but a pinpoint frozen hard to the surface of this wide continent. I say to you, I, Carl Disch, live. Do not for one moment think that it was a mistake. Everything was planned. They pushed me, tormented me, and bored me with their shallow lives. I left them behind, disowning the race called humans. On a bleak Saturday night 6 years ago, I walked out the door of the Longwire station. I never returned. They searched for me, as I knew they would, following my straight, deliberate steps for several miles. They never found me, and not one of them realized they had been tricked. They gave up, and I, Carl Disch, was free of them. I, Carl Disch, the most alone man in the world. It has not been an easy task to sustain myself for 6 years. At times, the endless singing of the winds almost drives me mad. I begin to long for human companionship. As quickly as the longing begins, it vanishes, however, for I've been tormented, scorned, and betrayed by my fellow humans, even those who I tried to love. No official sources discuss this, nor do any newspapers report this incident. In my opinion, this entire aspect of the story is completely fabricated. Just listen to this strange line found on a page with information about this supposed transmission. Carl had seduced the dog away from the camp by enticing him with cans of smoked oysters marinated in Fanny's secret barbecue sauce and skua gizzards pickled in fermented beetroot juice. The story appears to originate on the website of an author who writes Antarctic fiction. With the lack of evidence in this case, many theories have arisen in the absence of good answers. Ron Sefton discussed some of these theories publicly. If Carl was truly equipped the way that authorities and witnesses claimed, warm enough to survive for 2 days in spite of the harsh conditions, then how can it be that the search parties couldn't locate any trace of him? Just footprints that seemingly led nowhere. As I said, even further searches in the spring turned up nothing. The main theory is that, for some reason, Disch must have wandered away from the lifeline and succumbed to the elements in some manner. It's true that there was a snowstorm with temperatures reaching -45 degrees during his short walk to the bird station, as I said before. Others take issue with this theory, as Disch was experienced in this environment, and this was not his first stay in Antarctica. He walked this short distance 25 times previously. Sefton even concurred it was odd that the Huskies failed to find any trace of Disch. He was adamant that if Disch froze over, the Huskies should have found him, even if he was covered with snow. Quote, "If Disch had fallen and was lying in the snow, the Huskies would have seen him long before the searchers did. Similarly, if he had fallen and was covered by drifting snow, the dogs would have sighted the mound and rushed out to investigate it. That's the way Huskies are." Given that this case of vanishing took place during the Cold War, and the way Disch's footprints seemed to just end, some theorize that Carl defected to the Soviet Union and was picked up or perhaps kidnapped by the Soviets. While an interesting theory, there is no evidence that the Soviets were involved with Disch's vanishing. As I discussed before, strange lights and sounds were reported by the search team, and this was confirmed by Sefton. This, combined with the way that Disch's tracks just ended, led some to believe that perhaps Disch was abducted by a UFO. There is little to suggest that a true UFO with anomalous characteristics was in the area, but I do feel that the official investigation gave a rather lackluster explanation for the strange flashing lights and heavy motor-like sounds reported by the search team. In my opinion, a team of scientists and military personnel would be unlikely to be incapable of identifying lights and sounds from an ordinary vehicle used in Antarctica, especially given the limited resources and personnel at the South Pole. To counter this, though not unheard of, it is rather uncommon for a true UFO to make any noise, and in the vast majority of UFO abduction cases, the abductee is returned shortly after the experience, though perhaps not always. There are interesting and little-known UFO reports from Antarctica, but I'll discuss that some other time. In my opinion, something just doesn't add up. Some information is missing, or worse, someone is lying about Carl's disappearance. I sent a Freedom of Information Act request to the successor to the NBS for information on the investigation into Carl's disappearance, headed by Sefton, but I was not given any information not already available in the public domain. There have been many other strange disappearances that have similarities with Disch's case. Today, they are popularly grouped under the Missing 411 phenomenon, coined by retired police officer David Paulides. However, even preceding the Missing 411 label, we have many of these reports and cases. The belief that people can vanish without a trace, like Carl did, goes back to ancient times. One possible prosaic explanation is that Disch fell into some sort of crevasse. Regardless, in the case of Carl Disch, we are left with more questions than answers, sadly. How and why did Carl stray away from the handline in the first place? Could something have caught his attention, causing him to stray away from the handline? Why were the Huskies helpless to find any trace of Disch, a pattern found among missing 411 cases? What were the strange flashing lights and sounds reported by the search team? Is there something else involved in his disappearance? How did Carl Disch just vanish without a trace?